Welcome to Cyberhuman Frontiers, everybody. We have a continuation from last week. There's a whole lot that is going on in the ability to electromagnetically control, alter, cure, change, destroy, rebuild, reprogram cells at various levels in the body. We're going to be getting into this tonight. And before we do that, we'll get our community guidelines out of the way. This video does not claim to give medical, legal, political, or financial advice. We offer it solely for your entertainment. The points of view and purpose here is not to incite fear, violence, or anything along that line, but to share opinions and thoughts with other like-minded individuals curious about the subject. And the opinions on this stream belong solely to the persons expressing them and are not a representation of the channel Cyberhuman Frontiers. However, there may be content from time to time of a factual nature, a patent nature, a documented nature, which we may transcribe and which we may reproduce here, which are protected by the Copyright Act of 1976. We feel in good faith that we can replay that type of information under those protections. So, there will be a little bit of that tonight, but not as much as some other episodes. There is a whole new frontier. Every cell of the body and every part of every cell have specific energy signatures, resonance characteristics, and this is on the electromagnetic line. Of course, they also have specific chemical characteristics and physical properties and shapes and all that. But what we're focusing in on mostly, and we have been, is this new frontier, which is using energy, specifically designed energy of very precisely tuned frequencies and types and targets to be able to make changes in life processes as well as in cells themselves. And it's fascinating. It's amazing. It honestly is a whole new frontier coming. And we could probably do 25 episodes on this. But we started on it last week. We're going to continue with a little bit this week. We will illustrate and discuss as always. Before we forget, this week's science fiction movie of the week is THX 1138. George Lucas was the director. And it is an episode about a future in which reproduction is prohibited, but the use of mind-altering drugs is mandatory to enforce compliance among the citizenry and to ensure their ability to conduct the tasks, dangerous and demanding as they might be, with the ability that allows them to get it done. Emotions and the concept of family were no longer part of that society. So that's the science fiction movie of the week. You can watch it. The link is in the show notes below our video. Watch at your own discretion as always and enjoy. TMC, how are you doing tonight?
I'm good, man. How are you?
I'm okay.
Good.
Okay, I'm really anxious to go further with this stuff.
I have angst as well.
Okay. Well, we could get right into it if you want. We have a ton.
Okay, here we go. We'll start here. Darpa and the Brain Initiative. And the reason why is because we are going to attempt to go backwards, ending with the electromagnetic document that we were looking at last week, which is right here. And I've been browsing this briefly, and there are a bunch of things I want to share with you that they were looking at and reporting on back in the 80s. If you look here, 1981 is when this report was published, but the data was from the 2 decades prior. We are here today, DARPA and the Brain Initiative. And all of these things discuss a variety of ways to interact and interfere with and enhance the nervous system. Peripheral, central, direct neural control, all of it. The N3 program is something that we've looked at extensively over past episodes. So I'm going to save some of these for later, but I just want you to read, if you're watching, what these things say. Targeted electrical stimulation of the brain is part of one title, for example. Darpa aims to accelerate memory for skill learning. Darpa helps paralyzed man feel again using brain-controlled robotic arm. Now, some of these things are a decade or more old with respect to public disclosure. Throughout the entirety of the time that you're going to listen to this, what I want you to envision is this idea of software making anything that you see with respect to the hardware and the functionality of prosthetics and brain-computer interfaces. Any of the hardware can be simulated with software. And all of the stuff here that you're seeing, targeted neuroplasticity training, right? Dealing with the effectiveness of cognitive skills training, cognitive skills, how you think, how you absorb critical information. What do you do and how do you process critical information? What does that do with respect to how you translate what you do in the real world? Cognitive information, cognitive skills are applicable in a desk as much as they are when you're out playing a game, basketball, football, whatever. Boosting synaptic plasticity to accelerate learning. Going back to this hardware, software thing, the cloud, the Internet of Things, and the Internet of Everything includes your brain. And those of you that have been present for the last however many episodes, we've gone over how to directly communicate neural code, neurological code, what the brain uses to talk amongst itself, if you will, being able to inject that into your skin or with a transcranial magnetic pulse, as well as some other methodologies. Ultrasound and what we understand as light can do these things as well. And it's this idea of interacting with the nervous system because the nervous system ties into the brain and ultimately access to the brain. So we're going to go over the FCC in a little while, millimeter wave propagation. And the reason why is because what you see here is a frequency chart, and right around 60 gigahertz, you have major changes in water absorption and oxygen absorption. And the reason why this is important is because these are the open spectrum frequencies used for 5G and modern Wi-Fi, 60 gigahertz Wi-Fi. And the reason they're open is because the absorption properties that you're seeing here in water and oxygen are so great. The electromagnetic energy that passes through water and oxygen is absorbed by water and oxygen so well that you can repeat the signal from a different transmitter very close to another transmitter. So what that means is your Wi-Fi will be able to understand your network, and your neighbor's Wi-Fi will understand its own network, even though the same frequencies are crisscrossing. Multiply that times 5 or 10 or whatever. If you can open up your Wi-Fi settings right now and see a variety of Wi-Fi addresses available, they're all probably locked. But what those is a phased array transmitter that distributes open frequencies. And what I mean by open is that they're not regulated, meaning that they're not licensed through an organization like the FCC. And the reason why these signals are allowed in the unlicensed spectrum, in this case, 2.4 gigahertz and 5 gigahertz and 60 gigahertz. The reason why is due to their ability to dissipate in the atmosphere, dissipate in open space very quickly, so that you can have multiple transmitters stacked up side by side by side. Just as an example, 2.4 gigahertz radio frequency radiation emitted from, hold on a second, I gotta hide this sidebar here. 2.4 gigahertz radio frequency radiation emitted from Wi-Fi equipment on microRNA expression in brain tissue. And this study talks about wireless radiation, what we understand as Wi-Fi. They looked at 5 different microRNA sections, if you will, and 2 out of the 5 showed significant changes. So just keep that in mind when talking about Wi-Fi. Atmospheric absorption, another chart that's a little better of an example. Here's up to 10 gigahertz. This is 60. Right here, where you see just massive spike with the attenuation, which means that the electromagnetic energy is being absorbed. It doesn't go any farther. So now we're going to get into cellular manipulation with electromagnetic energy to stay in the spirit of where I think we're at with respect to this kind of technology. If you go to humaninternet.org, you will be able to see this under electromedicine. And there's a bunch of patents here. Some haven't been added. There's quite a few actually that haven't been added. But if you read these, you'll see that the medical side of electromagnetics and the use of electromagnetics with respect to biology is far advanced, well beyond what the general public understands at this point. So here's an example. 1994, microwave resonance therapy. And I'll just read this abstract and we can talk about it for a minute if you want. The real takeaway here is the very small amount of energy, 10 to the negative 20th power watts per hertz per centimeter squared to 10 to the negative 10th power watts per hertz per centimeter squared in order to influence biologic acupuncture circuits in the body. Acupuncture points, biologic acupuncture points with this very, 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 very low amount of energy, right? That when you understand all of this, Darpa and the Brain Initiative, which we can get into some of this later, the nervous system has been decoded. The brain has been decoded. And so when you compare and contrast something like brain Q technologies, which talk about using electromagnetics as therapy to find specific resonant frequencies of a portion of the brain or a portion of the nervous system or a neural circuit or an entire leg or the whole body. This technology, brain Q technologies, talks about putting a human inside of an electromagnetic field where the whole body can be exposed, and through the appropriate resonant tuning of a particular component in the body, and in this case, they're looking at neurologic disorders. So you're talking about the brain and the nervous system, being able to find very unique resonant characteristics of a particular location, place, or function in the body as it relates to the brain and the nervous system. Put the entire body in an electromagnetic field with the appropriate resonant characteristics so that you can provide therapy while the individual is going about throughout their day. So back to this very, very, very low amount of energy here, microwave resonance therapy, to be applied on biologically active acupuncture points with low power, non-thermal electromagnetic radiation using extremely high frequencies, EHFs. And this goes back to millimeter wave and high band microwave. In the EHF, 30 gigahertz, I believe, is one of the commonly understood lower frequency start points, if you will, for EHF, 30 gigahertz. And when you look at 5G and the commercial applications, what you will find is that a great deal of frequencies are used well above 30 gigahertz. And if you look at things like a cell phone and proximity sensing and ultra wideband and all the cool radar gesture recognition stuff, they use 1 gigahertz up to 300, and in a particular Google patent, it was called radar force sensing, where they can use a radar field to understand forces and pressures applied to your skin, or how hard you press on a table, or how hard you're writing with your pencil. They can measure forces, and they, in that patent, talk about using 1 gigahertz to 400 gigahertz. Again, what I want to highlight here with microwave resonance therapy is the incredibly low amount of energy needed to interact with biology. And in this case, it says to provide a steady, responsive reaction to damaged areas. And what they talk about in this patent is finding 2 or 3 acupuncture circuits in the body that talk with whatever's broken in the body, applying very low energy to one of the few circuits that talk to the broken area until they don't see a response anymore, when the circuit, if you will, no longer has any trouble on it. So you have resistance. You can measure at the beginning and the end of this biologic acupuncture circuit, and you can say, I have this electronic measurement, this resistance, if you will. And when that is corrected, because it's a doctor and they would have tables and understand charts and right, all of that, then you move to the other circuit that also talks to the broken area until that is measured and the electronic circuit looks proper. And then you move to the next, or you go back to the first one. That is what this patent talks about, with very, very, very low amounts of energy applied to the biologic acupuncture points in the body. Now, that's Chinese medicine. What are they doing? What is acupuncture? What is that? It's this notion or idea of hitting energy systems or the energy grid in your body. What is that? That's the nervous system. That's the brain. And they are the specific mapping or wiring diagram, if you will, that has been through trial and error in the case of Chinese acupuncture. Through trial and error, very efficient, effective way to treat somebody medically. This is a digital version of that using microwaves. This next one is a patent that discusses using resonant or harmonic characteristics to determine therapeutic resonant frequencies. Now, what I want to highlight here is a few things. I'm going to just read this because this patent blew my mind. Methods are provided for readily and efficiently determining resonant frequencies that can be used therapeutically or beneficially for things like debilitation or specific types of genomic materials, genetics, including DNA and or RNA, genes, and genetic sections. This method can be used in a variety of circumstances related to various human and animal disease conditions. Here's where it gets interesting. Methods here in this patent allow the determination of a therapeutic resonant frequency for use in various media having different refractivities. What this says is, in this patent, they discuss ways in which a transceiver, something that can send out and pick up electromagnetic information, electromagnetic energy, is able to, on its own, determine the therapeutic resonant frequency and be able to understand characteristics and variations in the media having different refractivities. That is the difference between your skin, your fat, your bone, your muscle, any other tissues in your body, cartilage, blood, the variety of media. Keep in mind, this is down to the genetic level, understanding DNA and RNA variations and understanding how to calculate, measure, and prescribe therapeutic resonant frequencies for sections of your genetics or for specific genes, or for specific RNA or specific DNA.
Fascinating.
Listen to this. This to me is the best part. Therapeutic or beneficial resonant frequencies are determined, thus, right? They're adapted for use. Listen carefully. Once the beneficial resonant frequencies are determined, they are adapted for use with currently available frequency emitting devices. Currently available
What could those be?
Yeah. By shifting the resonant frequencies to electromagnetic ranges capable of generation by the available device. So this patent talks about the basic math required for software to be used to do something like take a cell phone, measure resonant frequency characteristics down to the genetic level, and interact with the genetics down to a specific gene or an RNA or a DNA. And with the device that is existing, in this case, in this example, a cell phone, because the math allows for harmonics or subharmonics to be calculated, the existing device can be used as a result of understanding the characteristics of, for in this example, a cell phone. What do I mean by that? Your cell phone emits certain frequencies to connect with the cell towers, to connect with Wi-Fi, to connect with Bluetooth, to connect with other cell phones. Mm-hmm. Your cell phone is used to understand what's going on in the environment, what's known as proximity sensing. Your cell phone is used for wireless charging. Your cell phone is used for tap to pay or to exchange contact information. Your cell phone is used for gesture sensing. Your cell phone has a very, very sophisticated electromagnetic array on board that consists of a variety of hardware configurations that allow for independent tuning of each independent antenna, all driven by software, which allows for what they call a software-defined antenna, which ties modern cell phones into the 4G, 5G network, which are known as software-defined networks. In the commercial space, the commercial cell towers for 5G are known as CRANs, which are cognitive radio antenna networks. There's another nomenclature with CRAN that uses a different word for C. Cognitive radio antenna networks, cognitive. And the alliance that you can look up is ORAN, O-R-A-N, Open Radio Antenna Networks or something like that, oran.org. And these are the major players for this ushering in of the fourth industrial revolution and automation and hooking people up to the internet. So I don't want to go through this patent in any detail, but what I want to show you is the frequency with which you are going to see the word harmonic. There's 15 matches for harmonic. And we'll stop here. And therapeutic resonant frequencies may be used to inhibit, debilitate, or stimulate a biophysical event. So something in your body, medicine, right? The efficacy of such frequencies, whether for stimulation or debilitation. So if you want to stimulate somebody's immune system because they have a low performing immune system, this is a good idea. If you want to debilitate a cancer tumor, that's also a good idea. So stimulation and debilitation in a medical sense, there's reasons why you want to speed the body up and there's reasons why you want to slow the body down, or the genetic expression that's going on inside of a cell or a structure of cells like an organ. Sometimes you might want to stimulate, sometimes you might want to debilitate. In the case of cancer, obviously, you want to debilitate cancer. You want it to go away. This whole idea of stimulation and debilitation depends to some extent on the type of frequency delivery system, including variables such as power, waveform, harmonic content of the wave, and other factors. This is why software and radar, the ability for radar to understand multipath, the ability for radar to understand how many transmitters are nearby that allow for a very clean connection from the radar and any other transmitter? How good is radar at understanding where your phone is while you're driving 60 miles an hour down the road? How good is radar when understanding your phone versus 20 other people on public transportation traveling 45 or 50 miles an hour down the road? Like a bus. And everybody's just cruising along. What's out and exists in our environment is, or it is what used to be military grade technology. And the military stuff is now way into the quantum space. And all of this stuff is now consumer grade technology that used to be military grade technology. So let's go backwards a little bit here. We were looking at this electromagnetic field interactions with the human body. Do you have anything to say before I continue?
No, I'm just connecting a whole lot of dots in the background and thinking, and there is so much where this all comes together between whatever some of the conductive aspects in our atmosphere are and some of the, I'm just going to say, trace contaminants that might be in our foods and water, and the electromagnetics, and knowing what the resonant characteristics are of all of this stuff. It's like a complete encyclopedia of what all of the frequency characteristics and resonant tones, and they're tones at very high electromagnetic frequencies, that it's really just a matter of what someone were to choose to interact with in a living organism. It's like, this is like opening up a whole new field of science where it's invisible to you. You don't know that it's going on around you. You don't know what any particular device is radiating at your body or what part of it and what it's going to affect. It really scares me, actually, to be honest with you. It's pretty much all I have to say at this moment. I'm just absorbing what you're reading.
Yeah, that's good.
We're just very much at risk, TMC. Going forward, we are just so much at risk, and it's so invisible to everybody. That's what kind of blows me away. Yeah,
we can't see the majority of the man-made electromagnetic perturbations.
Right.
We can't. It's outside of the visible spectrum of light. If you were to take a cell phone or something that had a camera recording system on it that's digital, and you recorded your iPhone while it's on, even while it's off, meaning the screen is dark but the power is on, you might get a pattern of red flashes that you record from the laser system that is the Face ID. And it's either the flood illuminator or it's a cycle that is being performed that the phone uses to sense what's going on in the environment. And this happens invisibly because we can't see those
infrared.
Right. So,
and what it's going to do, if it's sitting there for a while, it's going to be on, let's say, standby mode or semi-asleep, but every once in a while, it's going to just scan the environment for any change. And if it sees that there's been a change, I'm just guessing, but it will probably turn on the entire array of IR scanners and scan the whole environment in higher resolution. You know what I'm saying?
They have technologies in the radar space that likely apply in this light space, because it's all the same thing. It's just a different piece of the electromagnetic spectrum. But they have a low power, high efficiency sensing system with Google Soli's chipset. You can look up Google Soli, and they advertise this notion of gesture recognition that allows for very intuitive things like turning a knob to increase or decrease the volume on a radio, or sliding your pointer finger across the other pointer finger for doing something like a temperature change on your thermostat, all using radar, gesture sensing. And what they talk about in some of their radar patents, Google, is this idea of sensor fusion, where you can use the radar field to tell which sensor to wake up based on what's going on in the environment. And there are other patents that talk about low power, high sensing radar, where it sends out very, very low energy, but in a very efficient way in order to create multi-field proximity sensing capabilities. And so it has a higher power and a medium power and a lower power in the example they give. And it is able to scale on at its own discretion what field to emit and or what field to look at. And this scalability allows for very complex energy fields and energy densities to be understood and potentially created. And it's completely unregulated. It's in either licensed bands for wideband use, which has gone through FCC approval, or it's done with chirp radar type ultra wideband pulse imaging systems. It's just known as chirp radar or pulsed radar. And that's possible with any frequency spectrum that has 500 megahertz of available spectrum, of available bandwidth. 500 megahertz is nothing. 2.4 gigahertz uses a variety of subchannels that is greater than 500 megahertz when you add up all of the bandwidth in between. The same thing is at the 5 gigahertz spectrum when you're looking at your Wi-Fi. Now, when you're getting up to 60 gigahertz and you have a gigahertz and a half for a single channel, you have 500 megahertz available times 3 in every single channel in 60 gigahertz. This also applies in any of the 5G frequencies that are going to be used for commercial or licensed applications. And we're not even talking about the ISM band, or I should say, we're not specifically listing or itemizing exclusively the ISM band, because a lot of, when you start looking at the FCC literature, a lot of things have a lot of slack, so to speak, with what's available for manufacturing and distribution to the general public, because it falls within the ISM band. So that's something to look up if you're curious. Going back to this document here, NASA document 166661, that was published back in 1981, that took the previous 20 to 30 years of radio broadcasting, radar broadcasting studies as it relates to the human body, and compiled a report. That's what this 66661 report is. That was published back in 1981. So we're going to spend a little time on this, if you don't mind. And we're going to start at page 23. Yeah, we already looked at this stuff last week. You know what? My list is out of order here. We're starting at page 12. And
yeah, I don't mind.
Sorry if you're getting nauseous looking at this. Yeah,
no, so much of what we're doing here, guys, is trying to establish and build out a knowledge base and a familiarity base for all of this stuff that's around us, because it's coming in. It's increasing in prevalence everywhere. So it's just it's really important to know how the world is changing us around, and it's around us, and it's so invisible to us. So yeah. And we looked at part of this chart last week, I think. Yep.
Yeah. So this is the spread of allowable or permissible power when you talk about a transmitter, a radio transmitter, with a variety of countries. And there's a huge difference here. The United States is at 10 milliwatts per centimeter squared, between 0.01 and 100 gigahertz. The USSR, 0.01 milliwatts. Czechoslovakia, 0.01. Poland, 0.2. Sweden, 1. And in Canada at the time, 5. And you have some variations over here, 300 gigahertz, 0.3 to 300. It's generally the same thing. more about occupational exposure. Occupational exposure, what is that? People that work on Wi-Fi, people that work on cell towers, people that work on radio antennas or radar for the military or for the weather system, or work on the infrastructure for corporate media, Comcast, Fox, Clear Channel, CNN. All of these groups have private networks that use radio and satellite. All of that is emitted microwave, millimeter wave, and other types of radiation. So these occupational exposures here are different than what is allowable to the general public. And there is language in the FCC literature, Telecom Act of 96, if you want to look it up, that talks about exposure time being approximately 6 to 10 minutes. And it is an average. It's an average. The lawyers and the lobbyists that cycle through telecom and the FCC and Congress should really reconsider what they're doing with the fourth industrial revolution, because this is a medical system. This document talks about medicine, the nervous system, and Darpa, the medicine. We looked at 2 patents that are related to medicine that discuss unique resonant frequencies with nervous system circuits, acupuncture circuits, and down to genetic resonance, medicine. So the other end of that spectrum is weapon systems, because medicine is also a weapon. So these are all occupational figures. I don't want to go through too much of this specifically, get into the weeds, but just understand that a whole lot of consideration was given to what this stuff does, electromagnetic radiation, what it does, and that there were considerations made with respect to how much power and how much field density was applied to people.
How much power,
and
what
time.
Frequency, what part of the body is affected in what way, all that. A lot of study.
Mm-hmm. So, yeah, I don't want to go through all of this specifically, but this is very interesting to me to read, because there are bits and pieces that are...
Yeah, it proves the exact point that you're making, though, which is a lot of study. It's not something that's, that we're well educated about. It's not publicized to us, but certain people in certain positions have really figured out exactly how much you can take of what frequency in what area and what might happen if you go beyond that. But and so the assumption is that we're all perfectly safe, right? Just, living in whatever electromagnetic bath we have to be living in. But you know what? What about minor long-term effects? Like spending 10 years with your phone in your pocket, and on it. And
you might have micro RNA changes in your brain.
Yeah. And 10 years, well, of course, each router that you have gets obsoleted long before 10 years, but let's, whatever it is, all those devices, all of that low-level EM all the time. And what if the combination of all of those different waveforms was controlled by software in such a way as to increase the intensity of it in certain ways at certain frequencies in certain steerable locations? There's just so much we don't know.
Yep.
Like steerable locations in your house, in your car, in your pocket.
Check this out.
I'm looking.
I'm trying to get the Zoom proper, and my hands are sweating, so the trackpad isn't working properly. Power density, milliwatts per centimeter squared. Exposure time, seconds up to hours. This is a variety of studies. These are a variety of studies that are assimilated on this type of a chart. So Czechoslovakia, USSR, ANSI, and the military. This is us.
Do they specify what frequency they were talking? They're talking about power versus time, but what frequencies was it? Was this 30 to 300?
No, this is the new, you're addressing something that to this day stumps me about this document. And it is that there's just enough information to ascertain what's possible if you know what you're looking at. So I've looked at this document over the course of 3 years. Every time I look at this document, I see something different. And what that tells me, going back to your question, is this document was meticulously put together so that it could be read, and based on your understanding, you understand some functionality of what's possible and or where the technology is at the time. That is called compartmentalization. So NASA, back in the 80s, think about what NASA was in the 80s, compiled a report that allowed for compartmentalization to be maintained, in my opinion, while this document was distributed. Because 15 years later, we had a revision to the Telecommunications Act that ushered in wireless phased array antenna systems for every type of radio communication that we benefit from today. AM, FM broadcast, satellite, shortwave, modern communication or telecommunication infrastructure, cable TV, and everything else.
But you need to know how to interpret what you're reading. So on one hand, if certain people became all up in arms about, well, we didn't know about this. Well, gee, we gave you the documentation. Not our fault that you don't know how to interpret it. I don't know. It's kind of a mess.
Yeah, that's not how I look at it. What I'm looking at here is I'm trying to understand context, because this document to me personally is very special because it has pieces of everything that when I look around in our wireless environment today and our internet connected environment, the Internet of Things, and ultimately the Internet of Humans and the Internet of Everything, and software as a service or anything as a service. Anything as a service. Now imagine what anything as a service is when you have the ability to simulate every sense, every emotion, every taste, every smell, every caress, everything, anything as a service. Active, controlled, full sensory hallucinations that we, as the general population, understand as modern entertainment. The applications of this in a military environment are profound. To be able to disrupt a world leader or a governing body or your opposition force from a military perspective, full sensory, full emotional, full perception, dominance over a single or over a group of individuals. Full spectrum dominance, up to and including every impulse, every single impulse that you process through your meat suit that you understand as everyday life. And they're advertising this stuff as entertainment now. So back to this document. There are pieces of what is being assembled today. There are pieces in this document that provide proverbial breadcrumbs to try to understand where we're at with the cloud, the Internet of Things, software-defined radio, software-defined antennas, virtual reality, augmented reality, censorship, this idea of the control of the flow of information.
Sure.
Right? Censorship or curation or boosting or deboosting is this notion of regulating the flow of information. What happens when the flow of information is biological digital neural code that does something like enhance your ability to draw, or enhance your ability to score a goal, or enhance your ability to improve your golf swing. What happens when that kind of information is inserted into the cyber ecosystem, into the digital space, where it actually has a meaningful translation to the three-dimensional space?
I like that term you just used, TMC, cyber ecosystem.
Yeah.
Have you read that before, or did you just invent that?
I don't know. It's just
I don't know. That is a catching term. Not something that I really like that much, but yeah, it's very apropos.
If these technologies continue to move forward, and they will, and they are,
yep,
the translation of a three-dimensional space in one country can be captured, extracted, measured, digitized, transmitted over the internet, and recreated in a three-dimensional space in a different country, up to and including all sensory functions, all emotional functions, logging into your eyeballs, logging into the auditory centers of your ears to tap into what you're hearing, logging into your somasensory nervous system, everything that your skin understands, pain, pressure, heat, everything can be analyzed and transmitted over the internet and recreated with somebody else. That is the virtual reality, augmented reality of today, and what they're advertising as the safe, loving future of tomorrow, provided to you by Apple, Google, Facebook, Twitter, all of your telecom companies. And what is that? That is the relationship that you as the consumer has with the brand of Facebook.
But they're in the position of curation of all of that data that you experience.
That's right. So the regulation of information is at a point now where the cyber ecosystem, the digital space, is at a precipice where a lot of additional information known as biometrics are going to be considered normal. They're already being admitted and archived, in my opinion, but it will be considered normal to have your biometrics function as currency so that you can have fluidity throughout your day. Oh, I'm home now. The lights turn on, thermostat changes, the oven turns on, coffee gets made. Oh, I wake up. All right, well, now the towel warmer heats up and the shower turns on because it knows my behavior. And it's the fluidity of life that will usher in enslavement because of the regulation of information.
That's right.
If the cyber ecosystem was open and free, something similar to what we understand as the Bill of Rights and the Constitution, very foundational architecture that allows.
If it were free and open, it would constitute merely enhancement, merely a new era in human experience.
It would not.
It's not that.
No, it would not. What it would do is allow for the system, AI, if you will, to provide enhancement. The system that we're on now only allows regulation by a few. It is a closed system. It is not an open platform. So it is not all roses and chocolate and sugar. If the network is open, it still allows for nefarious, bad, malice, illegitimate, disgusting, horrifying things to happen, because that is the way humans are, unfortunately. And how does that translate to today? people do unspeakable things to other people in the third dimension. That will translate under a closed system or an open cyber ecosystem. It will translate into that sphere, into that space.
You know what I'm thinking? There's a whole lot of connectedness that we really don't want, or that people like me really don't want. It's not excessive privacy or paranoia. It's just like, I have my own value system. I have my own thought processes, all of my own customary approaches to life that I want, that I'm used to. I don't want to be connected to everybody. I certainly, if I want to be able to choose who and what I'm connecting to, you know what I'm saying?
Yeah. So the ignorance of the entire cyber ecosystem that the general population has.
Speak for a minute about the power of AI. Can anybody even comprehend the idea that I mean, if something is monitoring and processing input from millions, maybe billions, and I'm going to call us all subjects, processing all that, then essentially in some ways, in some sense, that AI could be thousands of times more intelligent than any one of us, because it's able to aggregate all that, process all of it, and at very, very fast speed, be able to interact with any one of us and know so much about so many of us. And a lot could be learned from that by an artificial intelligence. I don't want to share a world with a cyber being that is thousands of times smarter than any one of us.
I don't subscribe to that.
What's that?
I don't subscribe to that. That's not what it is. And people that say that are in love with this idea of creating some synthetic consciousness, and that's not what it is, in my opinion. What it is its ability to rapidly calculate faster than humans can calculate. That's all it is. And so it creates this perception of knowing what's going on, but it doesn't. It's not alive. What it does is,
I didn't say it was alive.
Right. What it does, what AI, this whole idea of AI becoming sentient or conscious, right? It's really not. What it really is it's an overriding of everything that translates in the three-dimensional space, to the point that the probability of the next decision that AI will make will likely occur. A probability of the decision, the next decision that AI will make will likely occur. If that probability goes up to 100%, then that translates to the three-dimensional space, matter, people, plants, places, things, no longer having free will.
Among other things, yes.
Yeah, right. So that's very possible. It's very, very possible. I don't think that notion of humanizing artificial intelligence, I don't think it's a bad way to describe it, because humans understand very, very deep, meaningful, complex things referencing human activity or human experience. And so something like your consciousness is so innate to you, so fundamental to you, so special to you, so coveted by you, so much that to consider for a moment that you don't have consciousness anymore is something that is potentially unfathomable or inconceivable, or you write it off as I'm dead at that point. To apply that humanizing characteristic to AI is elevating AI with the use of emotion and all of the associated feelings that an individual has about their own consciousness. And that's not what AI is, in my opinion. AI is a system of instructions that is able to dynamically evolve the manner in which it issues further instructions. That's all it is. It's not conscious. It's not sentient. What it is interactive with the three-dimensional space and probably other dimensions, but it's also interactive with itself, self-learning, reinforcing. Mechanisms are built into algorithms so that AI learns in a similar way to the way humans learn. We learn through watching, we learn through doing, and we learn through repetition. That's all that AI is doing. And with supercomputing and quantum computing, with the advancements in those fields, quantum science, quantum information science, I think is the term, quantum medicine, quantum computation, and quantum internet or quantum communications allow AI to learn like a human learns, but exponentially faster, where an hour is equivalent to like a million years. And I'm exaggerating, but just to understand what exponential means. What AI can learn in an hour may take one human a million years to learn, as an example. And so when people try to discuss their understanding of AI, it is either a stroking of their own ego, in my view, to call it conscious and say, oh my God, this is the greatest thing, or oh my God, this is the worst thing. Or they're stroking the ego of whoever's paying them to say whatever it is they're saying about AI, in my opinion. So that was a great discussion, by the way. So thanks for that digression here.
What I'm thinking, I'm also typing in the chat. I wasn't actually proposing to say that AI was alive. What it's going to end up doing is it's going to end up competing with us for our pieces of our own conscious awareness. It's going to end up being able to do that because it can input as well as absorb and process information that it's collecting. So it's going to reach a point that it can, in a very real sense, can input and replace what would have been your own organic experience or your own organic perception of a sight, a sound, a thought, a memory, and it's going to compete with our own humanity. That's what I see going.
Yeah. Forward. So to speak on that again. It's this idea of sending a signal and then measuring the change in behavior or measuring the response of that signal and then sending another signal faster than a human understands what's happening. Mm-hmm. And I say it that way on purpose for this reason. People who are 60 are going to be much more resistant to automation than people who are 30. And people who are 30 are going to be much more resistant to automation than people who are 5.
True.
And so the difference is life experience. And the difference, in my view, is this notion of understanding what consciousness is in the first place. And a great way to understand consciousness is to contemplate things like God, or things like empathy, or compassion, or sympathy. Because what that does is it forces self to try to understand what self does in the presence of someone or something else. And so what will be challenged in these age groups is this idea of integrity. My integrity tells me that I fundamentally need to comply or resist. And so we go back to the demographics. People who are 60 and above, in my view, are going to be much more resistant to automation. Automation can take the shape of many things. It could be a self-driving car. It could be a radar system that integrates with your house, that understands where you are at all times. It could be a brain-computer interface to understand email or voicemail or log into a video or whatever. Right? Yep. People who are 60 aren't going to necessarily want to upgrade their phone. They'll keep a 2G phone for 10 years. People who are 30 won't do that. People who are 30 will, however, not like something like being forced to do something in order to be employed. You compare that to a 5-year-old, and it's very easy to say, I'm going to take your toy away. When the 5-year-old's going to go, no. And you say, yes. And they're going to say no, and you're going to ultimately take the toy away, and then they'll do whatever it is you were asking them to do because they want a toy back. A person who is 30 might flip the bird at their corporation or their business for forcing some type of a compliance. People who are 60 might flip the bird at understanding anything other than how to browse the web and check email. A 5-year-old will melt down and do anything to get their toy back. And that is the difference between understanding consciousness and self, and how self exists in 3-dimensional space, and then be able to take things like life experience, which go hand in hand with these examples, using life experience to compare and contrast whether or not their behavior falls within their comfortability with their integrity, which ties into their morals and their ethics. What makes you tick? What are you willing to do? What are you not willing to do? What are you willing to prosecute? And what are you willing to defend? These ideas and concepts, when you look at demographics like age groups, 60 versus 30 versus 5, are wildly different amongst those respective demographics. And so when we go back to quantum computing and quantum internet and this idea of sending bioneural digital code over the internet and having computational systems, software, hardware, and otherwise, able to provide a feedback loop to itself over the internet, faster than a human is able to understand what the impulse was to begin with. I pose the question of, at what point do humans no longer have free will? And in my view, that violates the prime directive. And if that actually manifests, I don't think the species really has much longer to go, because we will either go away or we will transform into something that is coined as transhuman, or something that occurs in the post-human era. Anyway, let's go back to this. Ionizing radiation versus non-ionizing radiation. Big deal when you look at what's commercially available and what's safe for the public or safe for work persons. And anything above 12.4 electron volts per photon. So this is where it really breaks off in the ultraviolet range. So anything low ultraviolet and then all the way through radio, and you could see EHF, SHF, UHF, radar, radio frequencies. All of these frequencies have an energy or electron volt potential per photon less than what they have established as ionizing versus non-ionizing. And they break down why. If a photon of ionizing radiation hits the cell or hits something, it's going to disrupt the electron balance. It'll knock an electron out of a shell, so to speak, for basic chemistry. And so what that does is cause things like cancer. What it does is shred your DNA. It's harmful. X-rays are harmful. That's why you can't have a lot of them all the time. So it's totally legal to blast everybody with 10 or 15 independent Wi-Fi fields that use the same frequency, and it's just repeated over and over and over again. But because it's absorbed in water very efficiently, it dissipates. It has a large dB fall or dB gain, whatever you want to call it. There's massive attenuation with certain frequencies that are considered safe for the public and are deployed in mass. And it's totally okay to blast people with those photons, but it's not okay with ionizing photons. And with that said, look up multi-photon ionization. And what it will show you is that with the right repetition of non-ionizing radiation, ionizing effects occur in biology. And that is, in my view, how you get things like the resonant characteristics for medicine in the patents that we looked at earlier, to be able to tune to the nervous system, the biologic acupuncture points, or the meridians in the system. Being able to do things like multi-photon interaction with very specific, potentially subcellular components in a biological. Multi-photon ionization. And there are other terms to look up as well that deal with electron resonance and ion resonance. This document talks about ionic charges and the variations between sodium and calcium and how that affects the membrane potential in a neuron, and how electromagnetic energy can manipulate these things and then put them back to normal again. And that's how your brain works. That's how your nervous system works with electrolytes: calcium, potassium, sodium, I think it's chloride, and some others, lots more. And there are subsystems within these things. So you have channels that your nervous system and your brain cells use that use calcium, but they're subdivided: calcium 2, calcium whatever, A, B, C, D, E, F. There's lots of them that work with calcium that require other variations in your biology for a specific channel that is within the calcium family, for that specific channel to be interacted with. And if they are to such an extent, then you get an action potential. Mm-hmm. You get a neural response. You get a firing. Mm-hmm. So,
or you get a metabolic process in a cell that's not necessarily a nerve cell.
Right.
You get something happening there. Yep.
This is a very interesting chart. It talks about ionization potentials of elements. And what you see here is a whole bunch of basic elements that when you ionize them, you can get very unique characteristics. This chart still has stumped me. I don't know what piece is missing yet. I've done a lot of random research and never have gotten back to this, but there are lots of interesting, chemical components here and that are readily available in our food, water, air, and or our metabolic or chemical exchanges or processes that occur on an ongoing basis in your body. Nitrous oxide. I think that's NO, I think. But
it is.
Yeah, for chemists out here or whatever else. And here's iron down here, and there's different categories here. 1, 2, 3, 4. There's something here that I don't personally understand, but what this shows me, when you look at iron, there's a known relationship. And so if you, like I said, the compartmentalization, if you had this information, you would know exactly what this thing meant, and you would then be able to associate all of the rest of it, all the other elements and what they do ionically and with resonance, because that's what this is. Ionization potentials. In order to do that, you have to put it into resonance to kind of do that. So anyway, adverse, benign, and curious effects. I don't know if you want to keep going on this or move to DARPA. We've got about 45 minutes, but there's a bunch of things in here that are really, really interesting. And I'll summarize this. This adverse, benign, and curious effects is really just an opening statement that says that they've done a lot of gathering of a variety of information related to electromagnetics and biology and physiology. And so they talk about here the difference between occupational and the general public. They say here, for example, a microwave worker might service a great variety of radars and radio transmitters, each with different frequencies, exposure levels, etc. Without a solid theoretical foundation to use as a guide, the most suspect source of electromagnetic radiation cannot be identified. And this is the gray, nuanced area that we all live in now with software-defined radio and things like radar and ultra wideband for the ease, simplicity, and fluidity with which we live our lives. The automation that we're already exposed to. a self-driving car. That LiDAR and radar are constantly being emitted from a single self-driving car, including Wi-Fi and cell connectivity. There's a lot going on with a connected car, but that's automation.
It doesn't even need to be a self-driving car. Most cars that have the technology package added into them, they're not self-driving, but they're doing everything you just said.
Everything basically after 2010 has a meter, what they call a meter in it. A guy by the name of Ralph de la Vega used to work for AT&T as a high-level executive. And this guy literally talked about in the next 5 years, this was a number of years ago, in the next 5 years, all of the meters, and I'm using quotes, he used the word meters, all of the meters will be in place to be able to track you for things like driving by the mile, or to track you for things like how far you go in an Uber so you don't have to pay, or to track merchandise or fleet vehicles or anything. The metering system, meters. And that's really, in my view, the underpinning architecture of 5G. 5G is a new platform that will be the architecture or the backbone of 6G, 7G, 8G, whatever other cool marketing thing they're going to come up with this rapid advancement of directed energy systems, beam systems. But it's beyond beam systems. It's actually field variation systems. What do I mean by that? Fields. Look up torsion field and you'll get an idea. But you have the ether, that's a commonly understood term. You have electromagnetic fields, which is it's an electric field and a magnetic field. Those are different based on how far away you are from a transmitter. Fields. The atmosphere is a field. Your body is a field. Your organ, one versus the other, is a field. That's all matter is a bunch of fields that are stable enough to interact with each other and not necessarily be transparent. So that's what 5G really is this massive upgrade of infrastructure that allows for software to manage, regulate, and control the three-dimensional space through the things that we understand as Internet of Things, IoT, and IoE, Internet of Everything. And you have now this new term coming out, the Internet of Humans.
TMC, I'll steal the share for a minute, and we'll get into the Darpa stuff. We have maybe we can just crack that open if we have a half an hour left. Okay, so here we have this. Okay, this is updated as of October 1 from LifeWire, and we can throw the link for this in there. 6G, what it is and when to expect it. Like, what is it? Okay, and I'll skip the beginning of it and get right down to what are the purported benefits of it. Okay, I'm going to skip down. You guys can read this to your heart's content. 6G benefits. This is what I wanted to get to right here. Let me make this share look good. Okay. Anything that you use a network connection for now will be enhanced by 6G. How? Okay, let's skip right down here. And I guess, I'd just once again say you guys read this on your own, but we'll just get some highlights. 6G will continue to support all of those areas, such as robotics working in factories, car-to-car communication, AI at our fingertips, and interconnected smart cities and farms. But 6G will go further than that. With even more bandwidth, it will ultimately expand into fields that we haven't even tapped into yet or considered, such as more immersive virtual reality applications, lifelike hologram video calls, for example. And then they go into a few examples. They, of course, they're trying to sell this, trying to, normalize it and make people be attracted to it and want to adopt the latest of whatever it is that they're doing. So one of those things they say is, 5G has been great, so much better than 4G because of low latency and the ability, for example, to stream video calls crystal clear, that type of thing. So 6G, it's like you kind of have to ask yourself, how much more do you need? I guess there's no end to it. How fast will 6G be? There's no telling. But with 5G, we're seeing speeds of up to 1 gigabit per second. 6G will obviously top that. And we're talking about speeds in the ranges of terabytes. So it could be 50 times faster than 5G. And you got to ask yourself what you can do with all that, or what somebody can do with all that. If your device is that powerful and connected to something that can transmit and receive that fast, then exactly how does that play into everything that we've been talking about in terms of these alterations of either monitoring, modification, alteration, or substituting inputs to biological systems, such as organisms, such as us?
I want to interject here before you scroll.
Yeah, okay.
Right there. That's good. Yeah, 6G. We faster than 5G, but still up in the air. And it talks about bandwidth capacity lies in the fact that it uses high radio frequency, right? It says in the last sentence, 6G might eventually approach the upper limits of the radio spectrum and reach extremely high frequency levels of 300 gigahertz or even terahertz ranges. We need to stop there and address the fact that these things are already deployed. They're already deployed.
Already.
The 300 gigahertz, you can look up Google Soli, Google Radar patents, and their chipsets are standard with a scalable frequency spectrum of 1 to 300 gigahertz. Like I said earlier, the radar force sensing Google patent talks about going up to 400 gigahertz. The only thing that needs to be done for that to happen is being able to put a tuner in there, an antenna system in there that is specifically controlled with software so that you can energize specific sections of the antenna and leave other sections alone. And the way they do that is by independently fabricating very, 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 very small sections on an antenna, or on the case of your iPhone. Your iPhone potentially is a giant antenna that is segmented, whereby when you look at it with your naked eye, the metal housing looks like solid, clean, sleek, beautiful design. When in reality, what it is nano-sized or micro-sized wires that are spaced so closely together and are independently controlled. They're spaced so closely together that it looks like a solid, sleek piece of metal, like a brushed metal finish. Or
really
whatever.
What it is, it's a very, very dense array of tunable antenna segments.
Yes. They can also, yes, that's exactly right. They can also do this by vapor deposition, whereby they have a substrate or a base layer, and then they can spray atomically thin conductors and atomically thin insulators with this kind of application technology. And that might sound really cool and super sophisticated, but this is at the billion units a year manufacturing scale. Hang on, I wasn't done with that. Yeah. So that's up to 300 or 400 gigahertz. The terahertz ranges, folks, that is the visible light spectrum, the ultraviolet that's below the non-ionizing that we were looking at earlier in the document, the NASA document, all the way down to the infrared. And terahertz technically is gigahertz. It's just 0.1 terahertz, 0.2 terahertz, 0.3 terahertz, as in this case, I believe, right here with the 300.
A terahertz is 1,000 gigahertz, right?
Right. It's 1,000 gigahertz?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So it'd be 0.0 then, 0.03 in this case for 300 gigahertz. Okay.
Yep.
Thank you. The terahertz ranges already exist in mass through things like your Face ID.
It's 0.3 terahertz. 300 gigahertz is 0.3 terahertz.
That's what I thought. Yeah. That's what I thought. So it's a decimal. So 300 gigahertz is 0.3. Yeah. So the terahertz range exists in the nanometer scale, which is to say in the infrared and visible light portion of the electromagnetic spectrum. So terahertz communications are possible today with software using the laser systems that are in place for Face ID and augmented reality, for all the augmented reality apps, Pokemon Go, or an overlay app so that you can look at something for fashion, or you can look at something for construction, or you can shop on one of these online stores like Wayfair or whatever. Right? So you can see what the cabinet will look like in the blank space on your wall. Something like that. Or what a bed would look like in a vacant room, completely decorated.
Yep.
Augmented reality. In order for that to occur and work right on your phone, so that as you shift and move your phone, the virtual image stays in place and the camera pans over and you can see your dresser, that's for real. And then to have that shifting and translation occur on your screen, where the virtual image that is overlaid into your environment in a three-dimensional way so that you perceive it as part of the picture or the image on your phone. In order for that to happen, very sophisticated lasers and sound and other electromagnetics like the ultra wideband, which is down in the microwave and millimeter wave frequencies, are emitted from the device and measured by the device many times per second.
That's for sure.
Thousands or millions of times per second. So that as you move your phone backwards and forwards, that virtual image becomes part of the augmented reality image that you're looking at on your phone. This is where the Oculus and all of the other virtual reality headsets are going. And some of you that browse Twitter see the virtual reality things that are coming out for things like first-person shooter games. And that is just the next step to delivering this directly to your brain and your nervous system after you've been networked to the internet. So the terahertz ranges in this case for augmented reality and Face ID and for the light display on your phone. Those are what 6G will use, and they're already deployed. They're already deployed. And what do I mean by the visible light on your phone? You can see that. So you might think, no, nothing's happening. Your eye cannot distinguish between a flickering image and a stable image if it's typically refreshed. The refresh rate is over 60. The other standard is 120. You can look at your television and go to the refresh rate and understand what I'm saying. What I'm getting at is when you watch your television, your refresh rate is set at 60, 75, 120, whatever, and it looks like a very stable picture. When 6G comes online, the way in which your television might communicate with your LED or fluorescent lights would be something like flickering the screen faster than 120 hertz, but then changing the flicker rate. So let's say you're flickering at 500 hertz. The eye would still see the television the same way as if the television was flickering at 60 or 75 or 120. But it's in this case, it's flickering at 500. Now, if the flicker rate changes from 500 to 450, the eye still sees a very stable image, but you have a communication there. You have an on and an off. When it's flickering at 500, when it's refreshing at 500, that's off. And when it's flickering or refreshing at 450, that's on. That is a 1 or a 0. If you can alter the flicker rate 1,000 times per second or 1,000,000 times per second, what I mean by that is changing from 500 to 450. Mm-hmm. You have a high-speed communications link to something that has a camera on it, to something that understands what visible light is doing, that is able to sample at 1,000 times per second or 1,000,000 times per second. Meanwhile, the person is just sitting there watching a movie. And they don't even know.
Completely uninterrupted, because at the refresh rate that's the minimum needed for a person to be able to see it, it doesn't need to be anywhere near that fast. So yeah, you explained that real well.
Thanks.
There's other information that can be basically hidden in there that's going to whatever other device might be receiving that output. You'll never see it, you'll never know it, and it won't interrupt whatever you're whatever media you're consuming.
If you want to kind of go out there on what's possible with something like that, if you were to do a frequency variation of 40 hertz, right? So you go from 460 to 500 hertz on a refresh rate on your television, you could treat Alzheimer's with that. You can look up MIT studies that discuss using flicker rates of light and using a television, for example, to break down the amyloid proteins that cause Alzheimer's in the brain just by flickering light into the eyes at 40 hertz of a particular wavelength. And it's in the visible light range. So that's one example. You can look up the electromagnetic manipulation of the nervous system patent by Heinrich Luce, and you can look at how the refresh rate or the change in the color, the variation of the color to go from a light blue to a different shade of blue and fix that at a particular frequency in that patent and the family of patents by Heinrich Luce that talk about magnetic and electric field manipulation of the nervous system uses a 2.4 hertz sensory resonance to do things like put you in a tonic state, or to make you use the bathroom, or give you an erection. So the ability for light in the visible spectrum that will be advertised as 6G has the ability to modulate communications in ways that we would not see because the refresh rate would be higher than what we can perceive as a flicker. And it will be completely legal based on the amount of exposure that is considered permissible to somebody like an individual watching the television. But if it's transmitting at a higher refresh rate than what we can see, and it's changing by 2.4 hertz, you may not know why you're getting an erection while you're looking at a hot chick in a bikini watching a movie as a result of signals being overlaid in the video feed that tell the system to refresh at 2.4 hertz. In a way that the user does not see a variation in the picture. And this is the sophistication of something like an over-the-air cable transmission or a satellite communications television transmission when you look at the way they stack their data and how they stack their channels. They multiplex their channels, and then it is demultiplexed at your receiver. That's why you have to have a card that tunes and unlocks certain channels. If you have a connection that way, it's very easy to put other types of signal modulations on the feed. And if you don't understand what I'm saying, go back to the electromagnetic manipulation of the nervous system using monitors by Heinrich Luce. And in that patent, it specifically states the ability to use something like a DVD or any other type of data transmission to send video over or through a monitor and stack these very low resonance frequencies into the data feed so that it manipulates the nervous system of a person nearby. Yeah. Cool. Yeah, they're slow walking a bunch of this stuff. So the way that they're doing the holograms at this point, what I've seen is ultrasound or compressed air that puffs. So when you put your hand in the field, it's measuring your field or the field, and then it will send an ultrasound out to interact with your body. It's literally just a pressure wave, or they'll send air, which is also just a pressure wave. The ultrasound is much more sophisticated because you can modulate it. The air, you can't necessarily modulate that so much, but that's the way that they're rolling out a holodeck today. The nervous system manipulation technologies that, in my view, have been refined with exquisite precision at this point, that we can look at broadly, looking at the Darpa suite of brain and nervous system study that they have. It puts all of this kind of stuff, the ultrasound pinging your skin or the air puffing your skin. This is like 1970s, 1960s technology that's got a facelift. Oh, they've got cool plastics and bendable, flexible LEDs, and we can time it now with really sophisticated solid state resonators, and it's really cool. We get a form factor that's flat like a table, and it makes this cool image, and we can put ultrasound ceramic discs around there and focus those things so we understand in three-dimensional space on top of this table. We can create a virtual dome that's invisible to the eye, but we understand inside that dome every point in space, up, down, left, right, forward, and back. And as a result of that, when somebody puts their hand in there and they get to the point where they touch the shark or the cloud or the feather or the flower, we can give them a very specific sensation on that part of their hand because we understand up, down, left, right with exquisite precision using these ultrasound discs that are on the same table that's projecting a three-dimensional hologram. This stuff is like 50-year-old technology.
Yeah.
And they just put a facelift on it, and they're going to say, this is what's offered with 5G and 6G. Welcome to the augmented reality revolution. When in fact, they're running quantum internet systems in the background and overriding your ability to exercise free will for your entertainment purposes only. Just my opinion. Just my opinion.
Yeah. Yep. But exactly.
Yeah. Where you want to go?
Darpa. That's where we go. We got half an hour. Yep.
All right. So we'll just start at the top. And I will load some of these. Some of them are likely dead, but it'll provide enough context here. So the Electrics program, establishing the underlying science and developing technologies that could enable artificial modulation of peripheral nerves to restore healthy patterns of signaling in these neural circuits. This program seeks to advance understanding of the anatomy and physiology of specific neural circuits and their role in health and dis-ease. In parallel, the program also seeks to develop novel biological interface technologies for monitoring biomarkers and peripheral nerve activity and delivering therapeutic signals to peripheral nerve targets. Potential new approaches include in the body, in vivo, real-time biosensors, and novel neural interfaces using optical, light, acoustic, sound, electromagnetic, or engineered biology. Engineered biology strategies to achieve precise targeting with potential single axon resolution, a single axon. Engineered biology. So here's some puff pieces about it. This is a cool diagram. This is what electromedicine is going to be about. This is also one of the reasons why Google bought Fitbit for $2.1 billion. This is also the reason why Facebook bought Control Labs recently, which is a spinoff out of Microsoft by a guy named Thomas Reardon. It is this notion of being able to interface with the nervous system, in particular, the peripheral nervous system in this case. What I want to show you is this. If you go to humaninternet.org, they already have commercial grade technologies for interfacing with your nervous system. And we've talked about this a lot. If you go to the wearables and mobile devices section, you will find a watch. And this is a dual brainwave, no contact monitoring device that looks like this. And this is a smartwatch, folks. It does this. It connects to your nervous system with electrodes, the same things that read your heart rate, the same things that tell you how you sleep, if you're stressed, your blood pressure, whether you got diabetes, the new fancy medical one that Apple's coming out with. It's a smartwatch. That's it. And it does this. It allows your thoughts to be transferred over the internet or Wi-Fi using the electrodes, which we'll look at in a minute, or this coil antenna. And this is just a generic example for an antenna. And what this talks about is using transcranial magnetic stimulation, which is pulsing magnetic fields or electromagnetic fields in very sophisticated ways to transmit your thoughts over the internet. And if you go so far as to consider for a moment that this specifically states no contact monitoring of brainwaves to transmit thoughts over the internet, and that this is simply a generic antenna. Imagine for a moment if the software was sold to a cell phone company or to a laptop company or to a smart home device company. Imagine if the software was sold to anybody who had server space on a cloud architecture or in a data farm. Imagine if the software was sold to a group like Microsoft or Amazon. They're not really into the phone business. They are into data. They are into biometrics. Both of those organizations were competing over the JEDI contract, which was a $10 billion contract to cut the DoD over to a unique private consolidated network that was managed by a publicly traded company to do things like identify anybody in the world at a military installation within 2 minutes, to identify and compile everything about them, including their biometrics. And these organizations also have contracts with Department of Homeland Security, Border Patrol, other three-letter agencies to do things like store biometrics and to do things like provide data fusion solutions for internet traffic, to scoop this stuff up out of the internet in raw form and through signals intelligence extract useful information about people up to and including their biometrics. So enjoy your smartwatch and all of the fun cell phone stuff that you have. Now, going back to this nervous system manipulation stuff, it says here in this patent, and you can pull this patent up and read it for yourself. It talks about sending a digital signal that's been collected, such as a neural signal, for example, the word hello, which has been interpreted by an algorithm, AI, right? This is an analog signal that can be digitized and then converted to a digital signal and then sent via Bluetooth, Wi-Fi, or the internet to a different person, known here as a person two, wearing a receiver, another smartwatch, or a cell phone that's nearby. The receiver can then take the digital signal and re-encode it as a neural message, which means convert it back to a similar analog signal, and then inject into person two's peripheral nervous system. And here's how: by methods of magnetics, transcranial magnetic stimulation of the visual areas in the occipital cortex, which indirectly modulates the neural activity through rapidly changing magnetic fields. Electrically, through the array of sensors on or under the skin. Now, this gives one a moment of pause. On or under the skin and sensors. Sensors, you say, under the skin, meaning in the body, flowing around or growing. That's nice. Well, the array of sensors they're talking about here, right, is stimulating the skin haptically that induce neural activity. What does that mean, haptically? Well, a haptic thing on your phone is a vibration. So it could vibrate and then convert the vibrations into neural code, but that's not an efficient way. Haptically, simply in my view, and you could argue this, simply in my view, is a generic way of describing interacting with the different somatosensory functions of your skin: pressure, heat, sensation, and modulating those in a way that doesn't necessarily allow the brain to perceive a heat sensation or a tickle or a temperature sensation, but use those receptors in the skin to interact with the nervous system, the peripheral nervous system underneath, in order to talk to the brain and access the vision center of the occipital cortex and put hallucinations in your brain. But hey, this is for super secret, Nancy Pelosi level communications under continuity of government kind of stuff.
Oh, goodness.
So anyway, back to this.
I don't think I would have gone to the Nancy Pelosi level. but you know, it's cool.
What? Dude, she's third in command right now. She's third in command, and you got this guy that, you know, poops his pants. What the heck, dude? What are you going to do? Yeah. Of course she's involved in COG.
Yeah, she is.
Yeah. So President Obama highlights new DARPA program aimed at developing novel therapies customized to individual patients back in 2014. This was the White House initiative to basically hack the brain, and Electrix is part of that program. So it's this idea of the nervous system and your organs, and then measuring and understanding a physiological health status. They can do this wirelessly. I can show you a patent from the Jerusalem Institute that specifically talks about using EHF, extremely high frequencies, millimeter wave, 5G style frequencies. 79 or 75 gigahertz is what they used in the patent, but they also said other frequencies are useful, where they measured the sweat and the sweat ducts in the skin to understand all types, I shouldn't say that, all kinds of different types of illness, to be able to correct cold and flu, to be able to manage arthritis, to understand stress, can be measured and manipulated. They can correct the behavior. They can correct the disease and actually fix your cold and flu with EHF, extremely high frequencies, according to this Jerusalem Institute patent. So back to the bolt-on stuff, nervous system, organs, and physiological health status. What they're talking about here is creating a closed loop system that allows for the measuring and the modulating of your brain and your organs, which is interpreted through a variation in your physiology. And when you look at physiologic manipulation or physiologic response in the body, what you're talking about or really looking at is the autonomic nervous system and the enteric nervous system, but that's kind of a hybrid nervous system between the central nervous system and the peripheral nervous system. The enteric nervous system is your gut, and you have brain cells in your gut. Just so you know. If you didn't know that, now you know. So let's read here real quick. The body's peripheral nervous system constantly monitors the status of internal organs and helps regulate biological response to infection, injury, or other imbalances. When this regulatory process goes awry due to illness or injury, peripheral nerve signals can actually exacerbate the condition, make them worse. That's known as inflammation, as an example, causing pain, inflammation, or immune dysfunction. Interesting. Yeah. So let's go to the next program and see what it has to say.
We suggesting potential immunomodulation here? How interesting
well,
is that?
It said immuno. It said the immune system back there for, yeah. This is hand proprioception, known as the haptics program. Oh, of course, you're going to, hang on, let me go back. This one, this one, this one, and this one. All right. Here we go. Hand proprioception, touch interfaces. This is where it gets crazy because you can go down a rabbit hole. Well, what's reliable neural interface technology? That's interesting. Haptics builds on a prior Darpa investment in reliable neural interface technology known as ReNet, program which created novel neural interface systems that overcame previous sensor reliability issues. Now last for the lifetime of the patient. Oh, so you insert it, one and done. From cradle to grave, you are networked. A key focus of haptics is on creating new technologies to interface permanently and continuously with the peripheral nerves in humans. How lovely. Haptics technologies are being designed to tap into the motor and sensory signals, in this case of the arm, to allow users to control and sense a prosthesis via the same neural signal pathways used for normal intact limbs. How lovely. That means directly decoding the neural code at the brain. Direct access to these natural control signals will, if successful, enable a more natural, intuitive control of complex hand movements, and the addition of sensory feedback will further improve hand functionality by enabling users to sense grip force and hand posture. Sensory feedback may also provide important physiological benefits, such as improving prosthesis embodiment and reducing the phantom limb pain that is suffering by approximately 80% of amputees. Let's see what else. Neuroscience of touch supports improved robotic and prosthetic interfaces. These are cool. I think Lockheed Martin has patents for these nerve cuffs. And the cool thing about looking at these nerve cuff patents is that they use light and electromagnetics directly on top of a nerve bundle to target, and you can see here, the specific layers of the nerve. And so what I'm getting at is this: you have major nerve branches in your arm, and all those major nerve branches will sub out so that it understands sensation between your thumb, your finger, your index, your middle, your ring, your pinky, whatever, right? And so when you attach onto a main nerve bundle, you can tune to a particular three-dimensional location inside of the nerve bundle once you've mapped that particular location, in this case, the one all the way down here that's red and blue. Mm-hmm. Maybe that's the thumb. Maybe this is the index finger. Maybe this is the ring finger. Maybe this is the middle finger. And all of the other stuff that's going on. So your tendons, your ligaments, your muscles, all the sensation, temperature, pressure, all of that can be mapped. And then with these cool little devices that are inserted at the main branches of the nervous system, it can be decoded and provide sensation. And the patents, I think Lockheed Martin has, I'm not sure. There's a few different companies that I get mixed up, but they're all part of the proverbial military industrial complex, proverbial, right? But these are major government contractors. Major government contractors, and they have these cool patents, and they talk about focusing and tuning electromagnetics and sound and light in particular is what I'm remembering looking at this image. And this is where I learned about V-cell technology, vertical cavity emitting lasers, V-cell, vertical surface cavity emitting lasers, excuse me. And you can make a flat surface emit a grid, an array of lasers. And that's exactly what the iPhone uses for Face ID. And that's exactly what the augmented reality rear-facing camera laser mapping technology has in their phones, in their piece of the phone, if you will. It's the same thing. It's a V-cell. And so they have very useful medical applications for being able to have a phased array laser grid shine infrared light into your skin or into your body or into your nerves. And when you look more closely at these patents, you can see that they can amplify the power and they can regulate the power at each laser dot. And they can focus that power more on one laser dot and turn some of the others off to stay within compliance of what's considered safe.
Right. I was going to say, you probably don't need much power, and it's probably well within compliance standards, which are archaic.
Well, yes. And the answer more generally and then more specifically is yes. And there's a couple different ways that can be done. If you can focus two lasers at a point, you can add up their power. And now if you can get wave interference in such a way so that you can create a pulse modulation so that as that light is hitting the body at a particular location, it's potentially heating up and cooling real fast. Well, if you can have a bunch of pulses from many different lasers hitting a general area of the body, let's say your face, where you have veins and nerves and everything else, right there underneath your skin, above your skull, or just at the skin, when you think about the vagus nerve in the neck or the arteries and the veins in your neck, or all of the 10 or 12 cranial arteries that you can, or cranial nerves, that you can look up, and you can look this up and you can see where they are. They're in your forehead. They're out by your eyes. They're by your mouth. They're in your cheeks. They're on the side of your head. And the vagus nerve and the trigomenial nerve and the auricular nerve particularly are very, very available along the neck and around and in the ear. And that's where we get into things like these smart connected headphones, which have vapor deposited electrodes on them, Apple AirPods. And all of the open exposed metal you see on your wireless earbuds for the magnetic attraction and the contact electrodes for charging them in their cool little charging case. Well, those things are conductive plates that create capacitive fields that can then be modulated to interact with the trigomenial nerve, the auricular nerve, and the vagus nerve in your ear or around your ear. And you can look this up at humaninternet.org under bioenergy interfaces. Anyway, back to this. Haptics.
You know the other thing that I thought of regarding energy and limitations, they have not defined peak like maximum peak energy for a pulse, right? A sharp pulse, and duration versus continuous cycle. And they have also not specifically defined additive effects of multiple energy sources coming together at a particular point. None of that has been properly defined.
Properly, very good, sir. So the technology has far gone past what is, in my view, regulated. And right now it's regulated by SAR, the specific absorption rate, and the maximum intensity of something. And so the gray area with all of that, if you want to go dig into the FCC, is this idea of spacing out the absorption over some period of time. And when I say time, I'm talking minutes. What we're dealing with today are pulse mechanisms in the light, sound, and electromagnetic space that function in the millisecond, picosecond, and femtosecond timescales, where they're pulsing hundreds, thousands, millions of times per second, pulsing.
When they're talking absorption, now the question becomes, how are they measuring absorption? Are they measuring heat? Well, if there's a peak, if there's a sharp pulse that's in a millionth of a second that takes place, there's not going to be a whole lot of heating that takes place, but there could definitely be a physiological change.
Yeah.
Some little switch that gets switched in a cell or in a molecule.
Or electroporation.
Or electroport. That's correct. Exactly.
You could just start blowing cells up with electric fields and pulses.
That's all done so fast that it really doesn't reach that anywhere near that level of the maximum allowable level of absorption. You see what I'm saying?
Yeah, there's also magnetoporation. You could look these up: electroporation, magnetoporation, and there is reversible electroporation and magnetoporation, and there is irreversible electroporation and magnetoporation. And it has to do with the pulse modulation and the field density characteristics in order to differentiate between something therapeutic versus catastrophic. And in some cases, you want catastrophic results. For example, when you're treating cancer. Right. If you could go in and electroporate or magnetoporate cancer cells because they have a unique characteristic that is different from healthy cells, that may be a very useful thing. But if you can do that with low energy, with the right pulse modulation, what exactly does regulation look like? Should there be systems in place that seek out malice in the cyber ecosystem? Should there be systems in place that do nothing but act as sentinels or sentries in the cyber ecosystem to do things like protect civil liberties, protect private property, protect intellectual property, and protect your meat suit, for crying out loud? These are potentially weapon systems in my entertainment-only view.
Yep.
These are interesting graphics. This is obviously a rendering of how this would work. You can see the form factor here that they're willing to disclose, and the fact that it's wireless and that it functions interoperably with what we understand as a common processor chip. Nerve bundles and a variety of cabling types. However you want to interpret this. These images are useful to look at abstractly And it's not necessarily because they conveyed it that way on purpose, but what I do when I look at these types of images is try to understand what we understand as silicon, the silicon version, and then the biological version. And how is this marrying those two concepts together? So I see nerve bundles here, but I also see a potential, like a ribbon cable out from a more complex, rudimentary benchtop or laboratory or hospital setting, where they'd put something like a can on your head that's tied to an ECOG array and have all kinds of crazy bundling that comes out because they're able to multiplex the signal and then send the multiplex signal a variety of ways through independent conductors so they can more cheaply manage the software refinement. They can, once a multiplex signal is processed, it could go on its own conductor, in my view, as I'm looking at this, and go to one system that's running AI a certain way. That multiplex signal could be collected in a different language and sent on another conductor to a different computer system who's running different AI and working on the software that's necessary to ultimately blend the two different AI platforms together. And an example would be something that's written in Python versus something in HTML or C+ or Java or whatever else. How do you take the variety of software applications that exist today that run the internet as we understand it and be able to collect and aggregate all of those signals and have AI function as a language translator and then provide a stimuli or a response back or a data set faster than the human can even process the impulse? That's what I see when I look at this.
Well, when it's faster than the human can even process the impulse, it's still, if it's sustained and if you keep sending, then the human will process the impulse, and it once again, it's going to be virtually indistinguishable from what the human would normally have experienced anyway.
That's the underpinning. Yeah, that's the underpinning essence of improving prosthetics, is to create such a fluid, seamless transition between what the user wants to do and what the user is actually doing and experiencing while doing with something that is artificial. It is the underpinning essence of this idea of collecting biometrics and transmitting them over the internet and recreating a virtual experience. It is the underpinning essence of all of that. Let's go to the next one. NESD, high resolution implantable neural interfaces. So, high resolution neurotechnology capable of mitigating the effects of injury and disease on the visual and auditory systems. Oh, how lovely. So they're creating novel hardware and algorithms. This goes back to what I was just saying a minute ago. If you're DARPA and you've got people who have been in a traumatic accident or soldiers, and you've got them hooked up with some really, really wicked hardware, it wouldn't be hard to plug them into an Ethernet port, so to speak, and send all of the information to a variety of locations, because you've been able to multiplex and then segment each of the multiplex communications to be protocol specific or IP specific. And you can compartmentalize research with a single patient in a bed who's completely paralyzed with something like ALS. You can compartmentalize all kinds of research by doing things like understanding novel algorithm translation protocols, which is something that DARPA would be very, very interested in. So they're talking about being able to read and write to 10 million neurons, basically, or excuse me, 1 million neurons with a basic out of the gate requirement that will obviously be improved upon based on who does well once they get funding. It talks about looking for integrated breakthroughs across disciplines. This is where some of these programs get kind of interesting. These programs include neuroscience, like the cross disciplines, low power electronics, photonics, medical device, packaging, right? So something that's hermetically sealed, that's implanted in your body, and manufacturing. So how do you get this stuff to market in the manufacturing space of China, where they're putting out 1 billion or 2 billion units a year? And what do I mean by a unit? A chipset. How many cameras are made in a factory in China that go in an iPhone? That's just an iPhone. What about the Samsung? What about the Google? What about the Huawei? Getting manufacturing scale at those scales while taking into consideration medical device packaging, hermetically sealed. Well, when you go into the nanotech space, that takes an entirely different, that's an entirely different conversation. Photonics, right? So cameras, lasers, screens, that's what we understand. Again, you take this into the nano space and photonics becomes upconverting nanoparticles. Photonics becomes your bones emitting infrared light every time they're shocked. Photonics becomes bioluminescence. Photonics becomes biophotons in the ultraviolet space, which is what your DNA emits. That's in the nano or the quantum space. All of that can be understood better with improvements in AI and in material sciences, particularly
science as well.
Nanotechnology, and synthetic biology. So you've got the synthetic or silicon nanotech, and you've also got synthetic biology. Those two things fused together create modern nanoscopic bioneural digital interfaces that can be deployed in mass through a variety of programs, in my, for your entertainment purposes only, opinion. And you could talk about stratospheric aerosol stuff. You could talk about other kinds of stuff. It could be put in the water supply, into food. It can be put in the herbicide, fungicide, pesticide products that are sprayed on general food staple crops that are absorbed because it's nanotech. It could be absorbed into the plant, and then it goes through the food supply, bypassing all washing mechanisms.
Yep.
It could be combinatorial genetic manipulation, whereby it's applied to the plant, it changes the plant's genetics, but then that genetic change is the right genetic combination so that when it's consumed by a cow or a human, it induces a genetic change in the mammal. And it makes you wonder why people like Bill Gates are buying so much farmland, because food is a very good delivery system for medicine, quote unquote. And I'm using quotes with my claw hands. So, yeah, NESD systems design. Basically, what do you need for miniaturization of hardware and better algorithms in the AI space? That's really what NESD is all about. Let's continue with the next one. Neurofunction, activity, structure, and technology, known as neurofast. This is pretty cool too. Military personnel control sophisticated systems experience extraordinary stress and are subject to injury of the brain. Darpa created the Neurofunction Activity Structure and Technology neurofast program to begin to address these challenges because we love our troops. By combining innovative neurotechnology with an advanced understanding of the brain, using a multidisciplinary approach that combines data processing, mathematical modeling, and novel optical interfaces, this program seeks to open new pathways for understanding and treating brain injury, enable unprecedented visualization and decoding of brain activity, and build sophisticated tools for communicating with the brain. Very general, but very, very telling. Researchers, it says, even today, researchers understanding the brain remains fragmented due to gaps in knowledge between brain cells, circuits, and systems information processing. That is no longer the case, in my view, folks. This was a while ago when this program came out. So they're looking at recent discoveries in genetics, optical recordings and brain-computer interfaces. Now, genetics, optical recordings, and brain-computer interfaces, we could put all of those things together with a company like Facebook, maybe. Maybe. Or Apple, maybe. Just saying. Just saying. So let's see if they have any cool pictures. They do. Researchers identify conductor of brain's neural orchestra. Ooh, and begin to decode the score. New tools allow detailed optical recording of cortex-wide activity in awake behaving mammals. Oh, optical recording of the cortex, which is the outside of the brain, which is the closest part of the brain that infrared light could potentially contact with something like a laser array system in your phone. Just saying, maybe. I mean, it's the same stuff they use for medicine that they apply to your skin for like cellulite reduction and removing blemishes and treating skin cancer and stuff. If you go to a bougie medical spa, it's the same stuff. It's that cheap to manufacture is what I'm getting at. It's that cheap to deploy. So they put it in all your phones. And we're looking at the recording of the cortex, which is the outside of the brain, the closest part to that infrared sensor and laser array, in awake behaving mammals. We did talk about 6G earlier, so I'm glad you did that because that really allowed us to flesh out the ability for light and flicker rates and what's visible and not. Yep. So here's a brain, and they're obviously able to map focality in a variety of locations. This is 100 microns is this line right here.
Look at the date on that, 017.
Yeah.
Fast forward 4 more years, guys.
Yeah. 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 So let's see if they got another cool picture here. Yeah. Advanced clarity method offers faster, better views of the entire brain. So this is a hologram. And if you look at the capability of something like the laser array system on your iPhone, it can build holograms. It does this through the 3-dimensional mapping capabilities. So it builds a hologram. It understands 3-dimensional space and time with respect to pulse modulation of light so that you can have access to your phone without punching in a code, or so that you can play Pokemon Go, or so that you can look at the new dresser that might go against that wall through Wayfair. And what you're seeing here is a 3-dimensional model or a type of hologram holographic image, if you will, of spatial points in the brain that have been mapped or have been illuminated or identified. And this was in 2014. So, yeah, good times with clarity. Let's see where we go next. The N3 program. Now, they won't have all the cool diagrams that you and I have showed previously, but we've talked about the N3 program ad nauseum. And this is the idea of non-surgical, non-invasive neuro enhancement. N3 program aims to develop high-performance bi-directional brain-machine interfaces for able-bodied service members. So you're connecting your brain as a soldier to your drone or to AI or to your commanding officer. Such interfaces would be enabling technology for diverse national security applications such as control of unmanned aerial vehicles and active cyber defense systems, or teaming with computer systems to successfully multitask during complex military missions. The most effective state-of-the-art neural interfaces require surgery to implant electrodes into the brain. The N3 technology would not require surgery. It would be man-portable, thus making the technology accessible to a far wider population of potential users. Non-invasive neurotechnologies such as electroencephalogram and transcranial direct current stimulation already exist, but do not offer the precision, signal resolution, and portability required for advanced applications by people working in real-world settings. This is where it gets weird. The N3 technology breaks through the limitations of existing technology by delivering an integrated device, keep in mind, without surgery, but has the precision to read and write from your brain to 16 independent channels within a 16 cubic millimeter volume of neural tissue within 50 milliseconds. So, independent channels, 1 cubic millimeter. So you have, they want a minimum of 16 cubic millimeters that have 16 independent channels. 1 channel per millimeter. To be able to read and write to a cubic millimeter of your brain matter and to space 16 points out throughout your brain, to be able to read and write to 16 different points in your brain down to a cubic millimeter. Now, when you look at how brain signals are sent back and forth around the brain, across the brain, etc., there are very specific channels that are fired for particular brain activity patterns. So if you can target where you want to deposit 1 millimeter and then the next cubic millimeter and the next cubic millimeter, you can then potentially begin to start restructuring very complex nerve and neural firings in the brain and in the nervous system, because they're all made of neurons. So if this works in the brain, what's it doing to a peripheral nerve? What's it doing to the nerves that are touching all your organs? And they're talking about reading and writing down to a cubic millimeter. Let's continue. This looks fun. Phased array energy, beaming in and bouncing out, 1s and 0s all around you. Cool little graphic. We've shown others that actually get into an injection, actually show a syringe where they use magnetoelectric nanoparticles that are steered with complex magnetic fields up to the blood-brain barrier or over to the blood-brain barrier, and then hand off a payload, a medical payload. And in another sub-project or sub-part of this, Rice University was working on delivering genetic information that was specific to the read when compared to the write portion of this program. So you have these two in combination, whereby you have magnetoelectric nanoparticles through Battelle, you can look all of this up, that are used for delivering genetic information, potentially, if we look at another partner on the program, Rice University, that will deliver genetic information to the blood-brain barrier so that it can pass through and segment out and partition reading versus writing to the brain. In addition, the magnetoelectric nanoparticles from Battelle, when you look at their description and their write-ups, as well as the patent, it discusses being able to use the magnetoelectric nanoparticles themselves as a read-write interface. So these are combinatorial, binary, tertiary, modular systems that can be used in a variety of ways, and they don't have to be exclusively injected, folks. When you start looking at how nanotechnology is used in medicine and pharmacy, it's applied in food, it's applied in cosmetics, it's applied through nasal aspiration, it's applied through a variety of ways. Basically every orifice and then some. When you start looking at the medical aspects of how nano-based pharmacology can be delivered to a human, to a biologic. What's next? ReNet, reliable neural interface technology. Wow, we're running late. Do you want to stop?
Oh, wow. I've got so many other tabs here in the background. I've been listening, thinking, and saying, wow, we could fit this in. And
let's pick up next week right here, man.
Yeah. I think we pick up next time around, guys. And
we'll start at N3, and that will show that other document that's got the real cool image.
Yep. You know what? All we can say is come back next week, okay? There's so much things to keep in the back of your mind is, some of these materials that can be made into nanoparticles. Among them, we've talked about graphene. There are a whole lot of molecules that can be encapsulated and delivered into a body. And if you know what their physical characteristics are, you can get them where you want them and to become chemically active the way that you want them to, with specific timing using electromagnetic radiation. Absolutely amazing stuff. Okay. Thanks. Have a great week. We will see you next time. Carry on bravely. We wish you well and look forward to seeing you all again. Thanks, everybody, for joining us tonight.